NFL Stock Exchange podcast. I'm Trevor Sikkema. That is Connor Rogers. Now I get to say it, Connor.
We are Good Morning Football.
Fresh off his Good Morning Football appearance, the man was looking fly as all get out. You were in studio. They didn't extend that invite to me. They don't do that to just anybody.
A little different travel experience.
You're right. You're right. You are right there in New York. It would have been difficult for me to take a cab from Cincinnati, Ohio, over to New York. But hey, you did great, buddy. You made the podcast proud, and now we've got 2 alumni for the podcast from Good Morning Football.
Thank you, man. It was a blast. What a welcoming crew they are at the Good Morning Football desk. It is unbelievable how welcoming they make you feel, how comfortable you feel. And dude, just to, we had the NFL Stock Exchange name thrown out there one more time on the almighty NFL Network. So you and I are riding high right now as we are about 1 week from the NFL draft.
The diehard sex addicts have to love it.
Oh my God,
point.
They're itching their face.
They have gotta love it at this point, which we love every single one of you. So thank you for everybody who tuned in to my segment as well as Connor's segment. We appreciate you guys a ton. So hey, on this episode, we got the guest mock draft series. We are coming towards the end. This is the second to last episode. We've got 4 teams that we want to get to, but Connor, before we get to all of that, we've got to talk about Deebo Samuel, and we are recording this on Wednesday at 5 p.m. on the East Coast. So if Deebo gets traded between now and when this podcast comes out, too bad. This is the intro that you get. We are not
redoing this. We are not, even if it's the Jets to trade for him, we are not redoing this. And look, we'll touch on it later.
We have a bonus episode on Saturday, so you don't have to wait too long for our takes there. So, dude, Deebo Samuel, Jeff Darlington comes out with the report. Basically says that Deebo Samuel has officially asked for a trade out of San Francisco. There was whispers of this leading up to this point, but it was always kind of this thing where it's like, okay, Deebo's playing hardball. He's watching what other wide receivers are getting. San Francisco's not going to lose Deebo Samuel. He was such a integral part of what made that offense go, what made them a playoff team that nobody wanted to face when playoff time came up last year. And here it is. Deebo demands a trade, but apparently it's not because of the money. I'm sure there's a little bit that could be involved with the money, but usage goes a long way into this. Being the what's the position called? Wide back, right? What are they the hybrid position for Deebo Samuel, the wide back or whatever? Yep. He doesn't want to be that. He wants to be a wide receiver. I don't blame the man. He doesn't want to get hit. What do you think about all this, Connor? I know your beloved Jets are in the conversation to potentially get him. What's your thoughts here?
Man, they're jonesing for a wide receiver. We know that. They are going to be at the forefront of any star wide receiver becoming available. And that's where the conversation kind of hits a little bit of a yield sign, right? Trevor, available. Deebo Samuel has requested a trade. The 49ers have not officially made him available, and everybody knows that they are going to come out asking for a lot. Now, the problem is if they ultimately face the facts that he's not coming back to play for them, if that's really where this is, it sounds like it is for a lot of reasons, as you said. It could be usage, it could be money, it could be, I know Adam Schefter briefly said at some point on air that it could be location, which is very interesting. Obviously, Deebo Samuel did not play his college football on the West Coast, so maybe he's looking to come back east. I don't know. So it's a lot to unpack. The Niners, if they do come to this point where they have to move on from him and there's nothing they can do, there's no dollar amount they can find to bring him back, then they're going to have to work fast because we are 1 week out from the NFL draft. And if you're the Niners, you don't want to trade him for 2023 draft capital and be looking that far down the road. You want impact now. And I'm not saying you're looking for Deebo Samuel's replacement, but how do you replace that immense production, Trevor? I mean, it's so fascinating to me. I've seen a lot of thought on, Twitter and all kinds of places recently that his production is so valuable but it's not sustainable because you can't use him like that.
Right.
I think what people don't realize is 8 weeks into the NFL season, right? And I was somebody that followed Deebo Samuel very closely early in the season last year because, stupid, selfish moment. He was on my fantasy team. He only had 6 total carries through the first 8 weeks of the season. So he was not this wide back that we're used to seeing.
Right.
He was insanely productive as a wide receiver. So even if you if he pushes away those chips, says, I don't want to be used like that where I'm battered into the ground, and is just a wide receiver, we are still looking at an extremely dynamic special talent at that position. And I think all of the leverage is on his side right now. And the one last nugget I'll say, and this is from Peter Schrager, and this has been going around for quite some time. A lot of Jets fans know this as well because they're following DK Metcalf, A.J. Brown in his mentions all the time. Now Deebo Samuel. All three of those guys represented by Tory Dandy. So there is no...
So Tory Dandy is about to get paid.
He's about to get paid, and he's about to get all three of these guys paid one after the other with no discount here. So these guys are getting mega bucks, and it's even worse for the teams knowing that the leverage is tough, that there are other teams, like the Jets, that will pony up the cash. Mm-hmm. So it just creates a wild storm of pay us big, and we want everything that we can get in this pool. And you know what? Good for them. Honestly, good for them for maximizing maybe the only time in their career they'll ever have this kind of leverage.
Yeah, and honestly, you know what? You mentioned leverage right there. It's a good time to be a wide receiver because
never bet in better time.
Teams are desperate to get better at playmaker. We've seen that in the NFL draft, and that's kind of goes along with how many wide receivers we see go in the first round, how many we're projecting to go in the first round this year. Even in the top 50, you could extend it to the early part of the second round as well. It's that the words that we use are arms race, right? That's what we keep using to describe this situation. Deebo Samuel, Tyreek Hill, those guys, like Stephon Diggs before he got that massive extension, right? What we're seeing with AJ Brown, we're just seeing wide receivers have so much control because if they say to their teams, no, I'm not signing that deal, trade me, guess what? There's going to be teams that are willing to pay that price, even if it's a crazy price. I think that we're seeing that. So, it gets tricky in Deebo's situation because his contract is coming up, because he wants a new deal. You never want to you don't want this to be a habit of trading capital away just to also then pay a player. You don't want to trade to pay. That's not what you want to do. And I see, I think the teams that everybody expects to be involved in this, the New York Jets, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Green Bay Packers. I mean, I've seen the Baltimore Ravens, I guess maybe, but mainly those three teams. The Chiefs have 29, pick number 29 right now. Green Bay Packers have 22, and I'm talking about the highest picks. I know the Chiefs and the Packers have 2. The Jets, from their lower first-round pick, they have number 10. And you could say to yourself, okay, when you look at what Tyreek Hill went for, Green Bay is probably going to have to offer 22 and a little something else. Kansas City would certainly have to offer 29 and a little something else.
Oh, yeah.
Jets might be able to just offer 10 and nothing else. And they could offer 10 and say, take it or leave it. We'll give you the 10th overall pick. And some people might say to you, okay, well, if the New York Jets are going to take a wide receiver at 10 anyways, just trade 10 for Deebo Samuel. The problem is, you and I have had this conversation.
Yes.
You're trading 10 to then spend $25+ million a year on a wide receiver, where a rookie wide receiver who you might think is talented enough to draft overall at 10 could give you a hell of a lot of team flexibility on that rookie deal for the next 4 to 5 years. So that's, I think, what is just interesting about this. I see a lot of people just go like, why don't they trade? Just trade for him. Just trade. Like, Deebo's good. Just trade for him. And it's a little bit more complicated than that.
Oh man, you nailed it. It's a great point. Because when you look at it, this league has become not as simple as just piling up talent. And I know, yes, that is the ultimate goal. That's the very simplistic way to look at it. But a big part of this league is picture it on a corkboard, and you have all the position groups, and you're going to take a certain amount of them, and they are going to be a large percentage of your salary cap. And for teams with a franchise quarterback is always in there. A lot of times there's somebody on your offensive line with big time money. A lot of times there's a pass rusher, maybe 2, in that group as well. But you need to decide, if we're going to spend here, how do we save here? And Joe Douglas was obviously, to use the Jets as an example, because they were the most recent. They were in on Tyreek Hill and lost. They did not get him. Now, Joe Douglas would not trade the 10th overall pick. Like you said, Trevor, because the $25 million per year contract that would have came with acquiring Tyreek Hill, that the Jets would need to save on a position, and this is for every team. The Jets are just the example here. Need to save on a position elsewhere with that 10th overall pick. And I know top 10 picks make a lot of money, but we're talking about obviously still a different structure in general. It's way different.
Different tax bracket, if you will.
Yeah. So you're looking at it, right? The Jets are such an easy team to use for this because they are in the thick of this right now. They have the almighty rookie quarterback wage scale right now for Zach Wilson. So they save money, so much money from that alone. Okay, so we're going to put $24 million a year into a Deebo Samuel type of player. Well, we want to keep that 10th overall pick because now we want to save money at pass rusher, or we want to save money, on a safety or something like that. The perfect example is the Jets pay CJ Mosley $1 billion a year. Maybe you draft a Devin Lloyd at some point, and CJ Mosley's gone in 2023. Deebo's money kicks in 2023, but you're swapping the CJ Mosley money out because of the player you just took 10th overall to step in. That is the corkboard of how NFL teams do this, and it just hits home your point of why it's not as simple as Deebo Samuel might be worth the 10th overall pick as a player, but money is an asset. It's a huge roster asset.
For as much as the cap can be manipulated, it's still not entirely fake. You still do have to, do your manipulating. And so that's just kind of what it would take. So there is a little bit more involved, but we'll see if Deebo gets dealt. We'll see what team it is to. What the contract ends up being. Of course, that we'll be able to react to that as well. Right before we get back to the Yes Mock Draft series, got to remind you guys that if you don't have a PFF subscription, now is the time, my friends. Draft 50. That's the promo code for 50% off, half off an elite subscription. That is a yearly subscription of the best that PFF has to offer. It's 50% off right now. If you don't have it, go get it. The NFL Stock Exchange podcast is presented by our friends over at Jock Market. That's Jock MKT. Their motto, stop betting, start trading. It's a really cool blend of daily fantasy and regular fantasy sports that you know and love. You buy and sell shares of players in real time for real money while the games are happening. Say you want to buy one player, 5 shares, $5 each. Basically, you're throwing $25 on the line. If they end up being the number one fantasy player that night in their sport, which you might know they got a juicy matchup, that number might pay out $25 per share. And then, of course, you're making a lot of cheese on that. So it's a really cool, fun, and new way to bet. Deposit right now with the promo code PFF, and you're going to get a 100% deposit match on whatever you put down as your first deposit, up to $100. Plus, you get a free PFF Edge subscription as well if you don't have that, or you don't want to use the promo code to go get an elite. Jock Market, jockmkt.com/PFF. That is jockmarket.com/PFF. Okay. I'm doing my breathing exercises. I'm going to list off all of the picks.
Oh, you're a madman.
Up to this point. I got to do it. Look, if you're watching on YouTube, the list is in the it's in the description, so you could just go see that at any time. You don't have to listen to me ramble. But for those of you who are audio only, we still love you. We still want to make this a full experience. So Aidan Hutchinson went number 1 overall to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Travon Walker 2 to the Detroit Lions. Kyle Hamilton 3 to the Houston Texans. Kayvon Thibodeaux 4 to the New York Jets. Charles Cross 5 to the New York Giants, which, gotta say, Connor, doesn't look so crazy anymore, does it?
They came out, man. They came out hot pissed about that one, but there has been some rumblings.
Evan Neal, Carolina Panthers at 6. Sauce Gardner, Giants at 7. Falcons, Jordan Davis at 8. Seahawks, Derek Stingley at 9. Jets, Ickey Ekwonu at 10. Commanders, Drake London at 11. Minnesota Vikings at 12. Tyler Linderbaum. George Karlaftis 13 to the Texans. Jermaine Johnson to the Ravens at 14. Malik Willis to the Eagles at 15. Trevor Penning to the Saints at 16. Trent McDuffie to the Chargers at 17. Jameson Williams, Eagles 18. Chris Olave, Saints 19. Andrew Booth, the Steelers 20. Then we've got Devin Lloyd to the Patriots at 21. Traylon Burks to the Packers at 22. Cardinals got Zion Johnson at 23. Dallas Cowboys got Garrett Wilson at 24. I have no idea how that happened, but it did. Buffalo Bills got Breece Hall at 25, which puts the Tennessee Titans up at number 26. Let's get into it. Here we go, number 26. It's the Tennessee Titans, a team that is very polarizing where people think of the Titans, where they are in their winning window, how good they can be. Are they close to a rebuild? Are they close to a Super Bowl berth? Well, to answer all those questions and so much more, we have Turron Davenport from ESPN, who covers the team about as well as anybody could. Turron, thank you so much for joining us, man.
Yeah, appreciate you guys for having me. This is something that we're kind of making an annual thing. So
yes, we are. Well, you keep knocking it out of the park every time we have you on for the Titans. So we got to keep asking. We got to keep asking you to come back on. So at that point, it's on you. So we appreciate you joining us once again, man. I'll start off. First question is kind of a little bit of what I talked about right there. What are the Titans right now? Because I think that people thought they were going to be a good team. They didn't think they were going to be terrible, but losing Arthur Smith, losing some of the tight end work. Okay, what's going to happen? Well, what happened was they got the 1 seed last year. It was an incredible season, 12 wins, lost to the Bengals in the playoffs. Obviously, Derrick Henry not being fully healthy for that probably played a big role into it. But all things aside, in a vacuum, a healthy Derrick Henry, a healthy roster, where do the Titans think they are right now? Do they think they are close to being one of those contenders in a now really talented AFC, or where do you believe the team thinks they are?
Yeah, they fully think that they are one of the contenders in the AFC, and I understand that sentiment, just being as though they're coming off of being the top seed. And there has been a little bit of change, but along with that change is more continuity, right? It's going to be a second year in Todd Downing's offense. Todd Downing will have another year as a play caller. And I know there were times where he kind of struggled to layer plays, right? Where you call something and you're trying to get this look and see how they defend it, and then you come back to it with something different. That was an area for improvement for them. But overall, you look at the uptick that the defense had and how they really stepped up that Rams game, especially, which was the first one without Derrick Henry. They saw how the defense can take a step forward, and that's what they're believing that the offense will do this year. Of course, A.J. Brown's going to need to be in the mix for them to do that.
Turron, looking at this offensive line, it's fascinating. This is a team that they know how to run the football. They know how to block up front, not just for Derrick Henry, but for Ryan Tannehill. And now we're seeing some changes, right? No more Roger Saffold. There's some young names that could be penciled into more key roles, whether it's Dylan Radins, who they drafted last year, and a couple other guys across the board. Do you look at this group as one, or did they look at this group as one that they're excited about some younger guys ready to step into roles, or they're looking at this draft and going, we need another big piece here to add to this unit for what we've lost?
I think they feel they need to add another big piece along the offensive line. Now, Dylan Radins is a guy that they like, but they don't exactly feel, at least at the combine, Mike Vrabel said he didn't feel that he was ready to start. And that's something that he's charging offensive line coach Keith Carter, along with the conditioning staff, to get right. Now, if you guys remember last year, Dylan Radins had some strength issues coming into the draft, and that was one of the knocks on him. He worked out with Joe Staley during the whole draft prep time. I think it's still something that he has to do, and I say all that to say this. I see him more playing at right tackle as opposed to left guard. Obviously, as you're playing on the interior, man, that's strength on strength. Like, you're in a phone booth, and that's just how it is. Whereas you could finesse a little bit more at tackle. So I would imagine he's going to be more of a tackle. And then you look at the guard situation, that's where they had their biggest loss in Roger Saffold. So left guard, I think they're going to look to the draft to fill that. And there are some really good options and some guys that I categorize as buy one, get one free. And we'll talk about that when we make our pick.
So let's flip over to the defensive side before we get to your pick there. Tell me about this defense just overall, because when I look at the depth chart, I mean, you see Jeffrey Simmons, he's a stud. They paid Harold Landry a lot of money. Obviously, they got Kevin Byard on the back end, but what's the belief in some of these other guys, like guys like Christian Fulton, Caleb Farley, Elijah Molden in the secondary, the guys at the linebacker level now, you know, the players who are on the defensive line next to Simmons and Landry? Is there a clear-cut priority, maybe in round one, but maybe even right after that in rounds 2, 3, 4, all of that for the Titans, that they would, is there a priority position on defense that they're going to look for? How are they viewing their defensive side?
That's what makes it really interesting, right? Because you look at the best player available side of things, and a guy like Devin Lloyd or Nakobe Dean could be available. And it's like, okay, well, that's likely going to be BPA. But David Long Jr. is a guy no one talks about, but good grace. If you watch Titans games, this dude he's a playmaker, man. And you see him attacking the line of scrimmage. He's not the biggest guy, but he comes up aggressively against the run. He's outstanding in coverage, sideline to sideline. And you match that with Zach Cunningham, who's just a violent football player. I think they're sold. They're solid at the second level. You still see a lot of mocks putting Dean and in some cases Lloyd to them. I don't know that that's a pick that they would make. And, oh, by the way, they spent a third-round pick on Monty Rice last year, who played pretty solid football, special teams-wise, and he filled in a few times when David Long was out. So I think they're set on the inside linebacker side of things. I could see them getting another corner, and the reason being is Christian Fulton. He took a huge step forward last year in the second year. I think he's going to continue to progress. Elijah Molden, to me, is an outstanding nickel corner. He told me that we got to speak to him earlier this week, and he told me that one of the things he really wanted to focus on was press coverage and getting better in that perspective. So that'll be really good. So that way, you don't see those guys being able to stretch the field as much from the slot. But there is a question with Caleb Farley, and I love his ability. I really do. But the problem is, availability is the best ability, and that's not exactly been something that he's brought to the table over the last few years. If he can get on the field and just fulfill a part of the potential that he has, they'll be solid. But I don't know that that's a gamble that I would make. So when you look at, guys like McCollum, you look at Josh Williams, I think those are guys in the draft that would be really good. I don't know that they're in a position to spend a first or third round pick on corner, but as you get to the middle of that, I think that is something they could do.
Looking at the wide receiver room, and even putting aside everything with A.J. Brown contract-wise, assuming he's there and he's A.J. Brown, one of the best young receivers in football. Julio Jones' move didn't work out, but now they trade for Robert Woods, who, before the season-ending injury last year for 3+ years was just a consistent performer at a high level. That's going to be a quietly huge add for this team. Is there anyone else on this depth chart that they think can really factor in as a number 3, or is this another team that might look into the draft and go, hey, rounds even 2, 3, or 4 in another deep wide receiver class, they can look to add a name into that spot?
I think they can look to add a name, absolutely. Sky Moore, Christian Watson. I know they've met with Traylon Burks, Jahan Dotson. They've met with those guys. Chris Olave, but that's kind of like a pipe dream for them. It's not going to happen. Like, if he's at 26, it'll be like a Laramie Tunsil situation. So hopefully for his sake, that doesn't happen. But to answer your question, as far as the number 3 option, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, who was an undrafted free agent out of Indiana a couple years ago, he, as a rookie, I told him this, so I'm not speaking behind his back. He had physical confrontations with the football. Like, it was like Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield. He was fighting the football, and he couldn't catch it whatsoever. But he's gotten better from that perspective. And now you're seeing him, like, really corral the ball. It's not making noise when it hits his hands. And he was pretty consistent last year, when called upon. So that is a guy they feel will step up. Des Fitzpatrick was a 4th-round pick. The sense of urgency with him really wasn't there initially, but he eventually settled in, and he's the guy that they'll be looking to, get some help from. But absolutely, man, when you look at this draft, Isaiah Weston out of Northern Iowa is a guy I think would be an outstanding fit. He's an X. He could play Z, but in my opinion, he is an X, and he would fit them perfectly just because of his vertical speed.
Man, it's all about having, in the receiver game, it's not heavy hands, it's soft hands. You got to tell them you got to get soft in the hands. You're not boxing, it's not the heavy hands. So,
that's right.
All right, Turron, let's put you on the clock here. It's been a very interesting guest mock, and, we've had a lot of these beat reporters come on and make the picks for what they would do. We're going to do the same here with you. You've kind of outlined what the Titans might do themselves, and you can talk about that a little bit here with your pick if you think that it's a realistic one that the team's going to look at. But who would you be taking? If the board fell this way, who would you be taking for the Tennessee Titans here at number 26?
Yeah, if the board fell that way, I would go Kenyon Green. And I know there's a lot of interest in him.
There we go. Okay.
And for me, and I always like when I'm watching someone else and another guy pops up, I'm like, hey, who is that? Who is that? And in watching Isaiah Spiller, every single run that he had that was an explosive run, was right behind Kenyon Green, you know. And I think when you look from a Titans perspective, they really appreciate versatility. He could play tackle in a pinch. He could play guard. I think he will come in and be plug and play in place of Roger Saffold. And you don't really have, well, I don't want to disrespect Saffold, who's an established veteran. You don't have as much of a drop-off from Saffold to Green as you would from like Green to some of these other guys that are available. In my opinion, he's the top guard, and that would be an excellent fit for them. It's not a sexy pick, but guess what? In order to be able to push the ball down the field and get the ball to your receivers, you need protection up front. He could do that. In order to be able to get those home runs from Derrick Henry, you need holes to be open. Right. He could do that. So I think that would be the pick. But Treylon Burks, I saw he was gone. That's a guy that I would really consider as well if he was there.
Do you think that the team believes that probably interior offensive line is the way to go? Of course, anytime you're picking this late in the draft, it's all about who falls to you. But do you think they'll have that interior offensive line spot pretty high on their list too?
I do. Because when you look at the way this team is built, they invest heavily in the trenches. You mentioned Harold Landry, right? Bud Dupree, right? You look at Jeffrey Simmons, he's going to be up for a deal. Then you look on the flip side. I mean, they put some money into that offensive line, right? Ben Jones just got a contract. Roger Saffold, that's the way it was as far as how everything fell. He had to be a cap casualty. But Dylan Radins in the second round, Isaiah Wilson was just, we can have another conversation about that. But, so they've invested in the trenches, and I think they'll continue to do that.
Man, now I kind of got to ask, when did you know it wasn't going to work out with Isaiah Wilson? Because that was way quicker than I thought it was going to be. Like when he got in there, I was like, man, play style wise, he's massive. He's strong. I get it for the Titans. That's probably why they fell in love with him. But then it was just so quick that pick fell apart. And then it's just like, he's just off the team.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. The second padded practice, I turned to one of the reporters and I said, you're not going to get anything from him this year.
Oh, man.
Because every single time, all I saw him doing, he was always on the ground. And they get in their stance. And he's bigger than everybody. So I expect a little bit of difference, but it was like this. You know what I mean? Like his back was like two backs above everyone else. And he just was in such bad shape that he couldn't even get down in his stance. Man. And then he got Colt, Colt Brennan? What's the quarterback from Hawaii?
Cole McDonald.
Oh, Cole McDonald. Yes.
I said Colt Brennan. I had the two previous generations.
Yes, right.
Cole McDonald. He got him cut. He got him cut because he got beat along the edge, and McDonald had to kind of change his trajectory of the throw on a deep outbreaking route, and one of the corners came up and picked it off, and 3 hours later, McDonald was cut. So, it kind of showed early, just football-wise, that it wasn't going to work.
Wow, man. Well, going back to the Kenyon Green pick, Connor, what do you think about it? Kenyon Green lasted all the way to 26. I feel like it's a good fit.
I love it. It's the pick I would have made here. Listen, he's played 4 spots on the offensive line. He fits their brand of football. He relocates guys to different zip codes on plenty of plays. We know his team wants to run. He's plug and play at guard. I know he's going to need time if anybody wants to give him a shot at tackle. It didn't always look great at A&M. But, man, this is a mutually great fit. Great landing spot for Kenyon Green. Yeah. And for the Titans, this is one of the best talents on the board at a position of need.
Yep. No, I totally agree. Absolutely love it. This is a great 1-in-1 fit here. Everybody go follow Turron Davenport on Twitter. Follow all of his great work over at ESPN. As you guys can hear, he has got one of the best eyes for talent and eyes for the game in this industry. One of my favorite follows. Turron, thank you so much for joining us here.
Appreciate you guys. I'm honored.
All right, we are up to number 27. Highly anticipated pick for a lot of reasons. Mainly because I think of the guest that we have here. He is the executive beat reporter for Pewter Report. It is the one and only Jon Ledyard. Jon, thank you so much for joining us here at 27 to pick for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Absolutely, guys. I appreciate you having me. I haven't been on Good Morning Football yet this year or any year, so I do feel a little bit out of place.
No, okay,
also,
we gotta get him out. We gotta get him out.
I tried to do what I could with my hair, but honestly, it wasn't. So I just have to. I think probably the best beard here. Maybe I get the fan? I mean,
you can grow the best beard.
Okay, all right.
Question.
So as long as I get something out of this, that's
fine.
Fine.
Back in our Locked On NFL draft days, sometimes you would go, when you lived in Pennsylvania, you'd go full mountain man for the season. So I've seen
cold.
So I'm gonna give it to him. I'm gonna give it to him. All right, so John, no shortage of storylines that have happened in Tampa Bay this offseason, right? Tom Brady retires, Ali Marpet retires. They're losing every free agent. The sky is falling. Tom Brady comes back. Now every free agent is back, and then Bruce Arians retires. So, I mean, it was an absolute whirlwind. But with this being a draft podcast, and you can kind of go on whatever tangents you want. My first question is, when Brady retired, what was the draft outlook for this team? Like when he retired and when the dust settled and when all the news articles were written and you were looking forward to the draft, what did you think their draft targets were going to be and how different might that be from what it is now? Or maybe it's not. You tell me.
Yeah, I don't know if it's crazy different because I don't think they would have drafted a quarterback. I really don't. And I don't know what we would have seen happen, obviously, in free agency and via trade if he had stayed retired. But I don't think it would have been a quarterback in the draft. So maybe it didn't change that part of it. But what it did was the ripple effect, right? So some players like Ryan Jensen were coming back anyway, but there were other players who I'm sure it helped, incentivize them to come back to Tampa Bay. So it kind of took other needs off the table or changed their needs as a result of Brady coming back. So I don't know if the move by itself changed the draft board, but now I think as they look ahead and they see who they brought back, it's like, okay, there has to be, I don't care what they say. Obviously they want to draft for the future. It goes without saying when you're taking a player in the first round, you want them to be good 5 years from now, and you don't want them to be good just for this upcoming year. But they're kidding themselves if they're trying to think we're going to believe that the player they take at number 27 overall, or if they trade back, isn't going to be a guy that can make a difference on the field for them this season. I would just be stunned if that's the case.
Well, I thought that was going to be the case in the second round last year, John, but then they drafted Kyle Trask. So I've been proven wrong before. In
the second round, you may be right this year. That may be the philosophy, but in the first round, it's going to be a player who can contribute, I think.
So, John, obviously, they were able to retain so many valuable players, and even spots they lost, they were able to make absurd moves like acquiring Shaq Mason for pennies. It felt like. What's not an obvious need, because we're going to get through all of that on today's show, and a lot of the fans listening already know the obvious needs. But what's an maybe underrated need on this Bucs team, whether it could be because of free agency in 2023 that it can open up, you see a player walking out the door, or just a hole on this roster, or even for this current year?
I think most people know that tight end until Gronkowski makes a decision. And even when he does, they need a tight end, long-term for this team for sure. That's one. And then defensive tackle with Sue, also still a free agent. Both those guys, if Gronk wants to keep playing, he's going to do it in Tampa Bay. Everybody knows this. If Sue wants to come back, he's ready to go. I just think they're waiting until the draft. They want to see how this thing unfolds. So there's still options to add to those positions, but right now they're two obvious starting lineup holes. The other one would be left guard, although they have players they believe that can compete for that spot. Aaron Stinney, Nick Leverett, and Robert Hainsey can all kind of compete for that spot the way the Bucs see it. I don't think they're up in arms about adding to that spot and replacing Ali Marpet with another star. I think they feel like four of their offensive linemen are four of the best players in the league at their position, and they should be able to get by with a fifth guy. And the history tells us that they're probably right on that. So I would say the secondary is probably, I think it's hard for people from the outside to sift through all the young players that they have there. Okay, they have all these young players and nobody's become a star other than, Carlton Davis and Antoine Winfield certainly look like they're on their way. Outside of that, what's the outlook like? I mean, last year you had people mocking them at DB. Then I think last year I didn't think it was going to happen. This year I think it could very well happen. Like this could be a year where you see a defensive back in the cards for the Bucs. Could be early in the draft. You mentioned who's players who aren't in contract years. I mean, you've got Jamel Dean,
right,
Sean Murphy-Bunting, Logan Ryan, Keanu Neal, Mike Edwards, Ross Cockrell, D. Delaney, if you want to go all the way down. Like basically every DB on the team is a free agent after this year except Carlton Davis and Antoine Winfield. So those are your cornerstone pieces. Maybe Dean is one. This is a big year for him. He has to stay on the field. But when he was on the field last year, he was really good. And so you don't know beyond that. Even with Logan Ryan and Keanu Neal, the two new players they brought in. So yes, somebody that safety I think is could be a need, or outside corner, and that it would tell us that they don't think that much of Sean Murphy-Bunting, or they don't trust Jamel Dean to stay on the field. Could be one or the other, but defensive back would be a position that they could take in the first or they could not take it all, and neither outcome would really surprise me.
Jon, you do such great work covering the draft, not just for Peter Report, but just at a general level too. Obviously going back to our days when we were working at the Draft Network and before on Locked On NFL Draft. And so I kind of want to just go straight into that draft angle with this pick, because I'd love to hear what you think about not just maybe what the Bucs are going to do here at 27, but some general thoughts on maybe what you think the strengths of the class are going to be at this point in the draft. So I know before we hit record, you said that 4 or 5 options you think are going to be on the board for the Buccaneers. So before we get to your pick, who you would pick for this team, who do you think those options are going to be for them at this point, and why?
Yeah, I can't really, even though I know you said pick who you would pick. And so it is in my mind, and I am going to pick who I would pick, I think, in this situation. But I am so kind of conflated with, I can't be unrealistic with my pick. I just don't have that capacity as a person. So I'm trying to also be realistic within the parameters of what I think the Bucs actually might do. And I think that there's a couple players that they'll consider at this spot. Devontae Wyatt is one, and he's on the board right now for me to look at. Georgia defensive tackle. Bruce Arians said it at the combine. We want a more pass rush inside. We want more explosiveness inside. We need somebody quicker, twitchier next to Vita Vea. Most head coaches, and now he's not a head coach, obviously, but most head coaches don't give you that kind of insight into what they're looking for in certain positions. But with Bruce, you always know you can expect some of that really intricate detail with this stuff. So there's no mystery. They're looking for 3. I mean, there's no mystery with who they brought in for top 30 visits. They brought in Devontae Wyatt, Logan Hall, and Perrion Winfrey. Those are explosive upfield, 3 technique type of players. They are not looking at the Jordan Davises and the Travis Jones of this draft class. They're looking at the twitchy guys on the inside. They're looking for a different body type with Vita Vea. So I think Devontae Wyatt is one, and I think Logan Hall is another. Those are 2 players on the board that I think the Bucs will consider at number 27. Now, with Wyatt, there's obviously been some whispers of off the field stuff that's happened with him in the past. Some of it is in the past. Most of what I know of it's in the past. We've checked in with some people. Seems like it is. He has turned a corner in a lot of those things and kind of flipped the page a little bit. So there is a lot of optimism, I think, but he's also 24 and he didn't really break out until this past year. And it's worth noting that even in a breakout year, his production isn't crazy or anything to look at. So if you're looking at things through those lens, there are some peripheral concerns with his profile. At 27, you're probably a little more willing to overlook those things than at 7 or something like that, where athletically and physically, Wyatt would probably profile in other years, but the production and the breakout age and all that kind of stuff hasn't really matched up as closely with him. So he's under consideration. Logan Hall, who also broke out this past season, is under consideration, I think. A little bit of a different body type, very different body type than Vita Vea, for example, but more along the lines of Will Golston's body type. Again, I think they see interior pass rush potential. I would like Hall for this season as a rotational player. Long term, is he an every down snap guy? I'm not totally sure whether I'd see with him, but those are 2 guys under consideration. Now, I think if he's there, and he's not in this mock, I believe, Arkansas wide receiver Treylon Burks would be one that the Bucs would consider. They don't necessarily see wide receiver is the biggest need, but they definitely like Burks. So if it was just best player available and they didn't feel like any of their needs were on the board, which is unlikely, but I think Burks is somebody that they would consider at this spot. You could say some similar things for Zion Johnson too at this spot. Again, I don't think they feel like guard is their biggest need right now, but those are options. Other guys, I would say 2 other guys that I would mention is Lewis Seen, the safety from Georgia. Again, just a strong safety. It can play in the box, can play underneath coverages, also can play deep when you need him to, but probably isn't a single high guy early in his career. That's fine. Winfield profiles as a single high guy. Seen could fill Jordan Whitehead's role, but has way more upside just in terms of size, athleticism to develop into something more. So a player who could maybe by year 2 play single high, and you could roll Winfield down and be more interchangeable with your safeties. That's really what the Bucs want, I think, from the next move they make at safety, is to become more interchangeable there. So I'd say that guy, and then I'd say also, I think Trey McBride, the tight end from Colorado State. I know this is high for his average draft position.
Wow.
But the Bucs, Jason Light kind of said it the other day, he kind of let slip. He's like, you always wish there were more tight ends in a class than there are. They've brought in 2 tight ends for top 30 visits, Trey McBride and Cade Otton. Those are the tight ends that they've really zeroed in on. Otton, this is too high for him. McBride, this is probably the peak of his range. Like, this is probably as high as he would go. So if you're looking for a surprise pick, I think that could be, McBride and the Bucs. I just think he fits exactly what they look for off the field, personality, demeanor, age, profile, skill set, all of it. Like, and he fits what they look for. So the fit is good. They'd love to trade down and make it happen probably, but we'll see.
All right, well, let's waste no more time. Let's get into the pick. I think you laid out the needs really well. You laid out a lot of different players that could be a fit in the first round for the Bucs. John, you are on the clock now for the Bucs. Which direction are you going in with how our always interesting draft board fell?
Well, with the way this board fell, I'm going to go with Georgia safety Lewis Cine with the 27th overall pick. I think this is opportunity to add another young player to the secondary. Keanu Neal is a question mark. He just is. He's missed 2 seasons. He's coming off a year at linebacker, which didn't go well. I think 2 years ago when he played safety again in Atlanta, I think he was pretty good, but I don't know how much you're banking on that, paying the guy, near the minimum for a 1-year deal. Like, if he's a starter temporarily, great, but long-term, I don't know if you see it that way. Logan Ryan is not a strong safety. He'll play in the nickel. Maybe he could help at free safety in a pinch. Mike Edwards, same thing. He's free safety. He's not really a strong safety. So they're kind of out of options that are ideal for them at this spot on the roster. So Cine makes a ton of sense to me because he can do that right away, step in a role like that, play around the line of scrimmage, play in the box, underneath coverages. Bucs are zone heavy, and he would be able to play in those zones pretty quickly. Man-to-man coverage is where he needs more work and development. Good. He would get time to be able to do that. Same thing with single high free safety. If he wanted to do that in the future, he has time to grow into those kind of roles. He has time to add some weight to his body, but physical, hard hitter. I think he plays with good instincts. Some other things, parts of his game probably need a little bit more development, but in terms of the fit and his ability to step in early on in Tampa, I think he'd come in, be a difference maker in their secondary. And that's something I still think that they need. They need more talent and more depth in the secondary, and he would give them both.
We know that they're going to pick secondary players if they believe it's a need. We've seen that in their recent history. They are very willing to dip into that secondary pool. You mentioned that the pick that you were going to make, which is Lewis Cine, was maybe not necessarily the pick that they would make. You mentioned that Cine is probably one of their guys there. Do you have like a pecking order or a ranking of the players, the realistic options of players that you listed that you think that it would go with?
Yes, our Bucs best bets are going to be coming out, or they're already coming out.
All right. I don't want to steal it from you. I don't want to steal it from you. So
and our final 7-round mock draft is going to be coming out soon. So you will get the full picture there, but it is one of the players that I mentioned there. If you are mock drafting for the Bucs,
get wrecked.
One of the 5 players I mentioned there, and Burks is off the board, so not here. So I narrowed it down to 4 or 5 for you.
When does this come out? When is your
the final 7-round mock draft? I think it's coming out. It might be coming out Sunday night at Pewter Report.
Okay, yeah, beautiful. So look, as long as it comes out before I have to turn in my final mock draft, that's all I care about.
Yeah. It'll be out. So you can copy paste.
Okay, great. Beautiful. That's what it's going to be. It's just going to be a copy paste straight into it.
Hey, we got it right last year. We got both first and second round picks right last year.
Wow. I mean, like, I'm not just saying this because I used to work for Pewter Report. Like, Pewter Report and Scott has been there all along. I worked there, you worked there, everything. And so, like, we've always been pretty big on the draft, but like Scott's got a good beat on what the Bucs are going to do. He loves the draft. And also y'all have really good insight into what Jason Light might do or his tendencies. So y'all have a pretty good idea of what might happen.
It's hard at 27 though, dude. It was hard at 32 last year.
Right.
But it's going to be hard at 27 because there's a couple more needs, and it's going to be tricky this year, but hopefully it's in our best bets, or we feel like we've got we finished it up today and completed it. So we feel like we've got a good outlook on it. So if you're looking to who the Bucs might draft, that'll drop this weekend sometime.
All right, there we go. Everybody, make sure you go read that. You listen to all of the podcasts and live shows that John and the Pewter Report people are doing. They cover the Bucs about as well as anyone possibly could covering a team, whether it's draft, fantasy football, in season, whatever it is. John, y'all do such great work. Appreciate you for joining us, my friend. Thanks, buddy. Always appreciate you guys. You guys are the best. Keep doing what you're doing. It's always a good listen, and it's great to see you both thriving.
Thanks, brother.
Man. All right, round 2 for the Green Bay Packers. I shouldn't say round 2 because it's still round 1, so that was a bad reference. The second pick in the first round for the Green Bay Packers. Okay, there we go. They picked Treylon Burks at number 22. Very interested to see who they're going to take at number 28 because we have one of my favorite guests on this guest mock draft series. We have Justis Mosqueda, who is the community producer. Got to get the title right for Acme Packing Company, the blog that covers the Green Bay Packers over at SB Nation. Justis, how are you doing, my friend? Appreciate you joining us.
I was doing better until you told me Treylon Burks went 22nd, and I know you cracked that smile there. That's not where I would have gone, but hey, once the dominoes are out there, what can you do?
Listen, we gotta let Pete be his own man, and he took Treylon Burks over Garrett Wilson, and we gotta let him live with that. I think that's what we got to do. Would you have taken Garrett Wilson at 22?
I'm not even a Garrett Wilson guy, but I would have taken Garrett Wilson.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a vertical threat. He's an acrobat. I think he's limited to those two things. And I think people might think that he's better than that, but I would take that over Treylon Burks, where, you're hearing some stuff now where it's like in the interviews and stuff, you might be falling down because people are learning why maybe he was playing in the slot so much and why they had to kind of dictate touches for him. But it is what it is. At least it's not Christian Watson and his 35% of offensive snaps that he played and like 100 receptions at the FCS level, even though he ran a 4.3 over 4 years. So
I learned very quickly that Packers fans and Chiefs fans want no part of Christian Watson at the back end of the first round. So
no, don't do it.
I stopped mocking him to
give us George Pickens.
Those days are over.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. All right, so before we get to some Packers specific questions, Justis is a OG pillar of draft Twitter, and he might roll his eyes at having that title, but he has been on the draft Twitter game for a really long time. So I'm curious, we're talking about wide receivers here. Who do you like the most in this class? Who are the guys that you really like? Maybe either your top guy, your top two guys, something like that.
I mean, it's Jameson number one for me. I mean, he could just fly, and it's really as simple as that. And then number two is Chris Olave for me. I know he's not everyone's favorite from Ohio State. Some people think he's the third best wide receiver from Ohio State, which is crazy to me, but he's just so dang smooth. He reminds me so much of like Calvin Ridley. I think he could come in and produce immediately. So just kind of viewing it from like a Packers perspective, they need speed, right? So it's like those two, and then Garrett Wilson is kind of like a distant third in my mind, in terms of like the top of the draft for me.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I like the difference of opinion there. And yeah, if Jameson Williams was healthy, I think it would have probably limited a lot of the debate, honestly, in this draft. If he was healthy, didn't have the ACL tear, I think everybody would have been pretty comfortable with him as a surefire top 10
Everyone
pick.
would have pointed to him and said, this is the one guy who could produce against that Georgia defense.
Right.
Let's not overthink this.
Right.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. So I kind of want to throw a different angle at you once again before we get to the Packers, although it kind of does have a little to do with them, I think, at the end of the day. This edge class, this is regarded as, in my eyes, maybe not an edge class that has this blue chip talent. It's not headlined by a Myles Garrett or a Chase Young or a Nick Bosa, but it's definitely one of the deeper edge classes we've seen in a while in terms of it's more than just a 3-4 player edge class. How do you kind of stack up this edge class? And is there anyone outside the obvious names that we kick around over and over again at the top of this draft that you've kind of been a little higher on, similar to how your approach was with Olave with the wide receivers?
Yeah, I like these guys. I think it's a pretty good class. I think the one guy I don't necessarily get is Jermaine Johnson. He's a guy I probably think of like that guy usually goes in the second round, and he's being talked about as a top 10 type of pick right now. And I'm like, I don't really get it. But I really like Karlaftis relative to like where people have him. I think he should be a guy that, you're picking at 12 or something like that, and you're should be slobbering, being like, oh my God, I can't believe this guy is here. And then later in the draft, I mean, Boye Mafe does some interesting things. I know he's on the older side. He's definitely like a designated pass rusher type of guy, but he can give you some snaps. And there's not that often that you can look at the second round and say like, hey, these guys actually should be going there, right? Like You've seen guys like Azeez Ojulari, who's like only a run defender, basically, like go in the second round and not be able to produce early on. I think a guy like Arnold Ebiketie is really interesting. He was a guy who stood out to me really early on. I wasn't even watching the edge rushers yet because I was kind of going through like Packers positional need rankings basically, and like start with wide receivers. I'm watching Ohio State and I'm like, who the hell is this 17? He keeps standing out. Like, is he in this draft class? And it's Ebiketie, and you just keep watching him over and over again against these Big Ten offensive linemen. You're like, this guy should be a top 40 pick easily. Now he's kind of risen there. The one guy I think people haven't necessarily caught on to is like Josh Paschal from Kentucky. He's really fun, and he might not be for everyone because you do kind of have to move him around on the defensive line. But like, if someone wants to use him like as Darius Smith, and I know that feels kind of like a lazy comparison because they're both Kentucky Wildcats, but if you want to bounce him around the line of scrimmage, and he can come in and immediately be your third guy, and you're just going to improve your pressure packages incredibly early on. You have to be a little bit more versatile. You can't just like roll out the ball and just kind of play bland defense. So like fits like Philadelphia or where, like, I'm just thinking of bland defenses off the top of my head. Like those aren't going to be teams that overvalue him, but like he can come in and be a great designated pass rusher. If he's there after pick, 40, he's definitely the best guy on the board, in my opinion.
So let's get into some of the Packers options here in the draft. And obviously we've got the wide receiver pick up at number 22, but let's imagine we're just going into this draft for the Packers, specifically replacing Davante Adams. Take that 22 pick away that's already been made in this guest mock draft. Where are they right now in replacing that kind of talent in the offense? I know they signed Sammy Watkins. They've got Allen Lazard. I think Randall Cobb's still there, right? So, I mean, it's not like it's star-studded guys, but are you somebody who thinks that they should double dip at wide receiver, that if they don't pick a wide receiver in the first round at this point, it's malpractice? Like, where are you with the priority that is wide receiver relative to the other Packers needs right now?
I mean, they definitely need to take one, right? At the very least. You look at the production right now, the contract details today, it's $420. Sammy Watkins, he got basically like a $2 million deal. So that doesn't even necessarily mean that he's locked in to making this roster. But if you look at kind of the roster construction, you got Sammy Watkins, you got Randall Cobb, you got Allen Lazard, you got Amari Rodgers. Okay, that's 4 roster spots, alone. Plus, you figure one of them is going to have to play. Someone else is going to have to play special teams because none of those guys do it. So like they had a guy, Malik Taylor, who was doing that last year. Let's assume he makes it. That's 5 wide receiver spots you got locked in already. So my thought at wide receiver is maybe you don't have to double dip, but you have to at least take one giant swing, which is why I think like, I don't know, bend the ear of the Chargers at 17 and be like, hey, 22 and a third. Like that might be able to get us Chris Olave. Like if that's the difference between a Chris Olave or sitting there and being like, we should take Treylon Burks to replace Allen Lazard in the year. Like that makes more sense to me because they need speed is the other thing. And the speed wears away quick, right? Like we talked about the top 3 guys in the draft, and then you're talking about 4 guys, and you're looking at like Alec Pierce, Christian Watson, where you're like, I really have to squint at these guys to think of them as like year 1 producers.
So with that being said, when I hear they need speed, and obviously they're a team that has no problem rolling out and playing 6'3", 6'4" wide receivers over and over again, are they maybe one of those mystery teams for George Pickens? I've seen you tweet that you're obviously personally high on him. I've seen draft ranges for him unlike any other player, right? I have seen people say, hey, he could go in the first round. A lot of people understandably are playing it safe and thinking his range is in that, late, maybe top 40, but right in the 40s around there. I mean, when you break it down like that in terms of the fit of what they need, the ceiling with Pickens, is that completely insane if they wanted to take a different player at 22 that they value extremely highly, and then at 28, or even if they move back into the top of the second round, look that way for a wide receiver?
I would love that. I would love George Pickens at 28. If we could sign that up right now, 8 days before the draft, I don't care who's on the board at that point. Just plug it in. I get to go to sleep, just sleep calmly at night. That's it. Yeah, I'd be good with that for sure. I mean, I like Pickens more than Burks, honestly. So,
well, as do I. He's ahead of him in our rankings. I feel like Pickens isn't going to go in the first round. I think that he should be considered.
I don't think so too. And
yeah,
just like the buzz around it.
There's just not a lot, and I don't know if it's just like. Again, like I feel like we're finding like character stuff with people, or like teams aren't gelling with certain prospects more in this class than it feels like in the past. So like, I don't know if that's a George Pickens thing, because when you look at the rest of it, the size, the speed, the strength, the profile, the play on the line of scrimmage, like it's all there for George Pickens. I'd certainly consider him at the back end of the first round, but it just doesn't seem like that he's getting that buzz. So what about
and I talked to Nakobe Dean like last week, and Kobe was like, best dude I ever saw in practice, George Pickens by far. And it's like, this dude is playing against top 10 offensive linemen fairly consistently over his career. And he's still like, yeah, George Pickens is that dude. And imagine him producing in practice against that Georgia defense. Mind you, again, the only guy that was able to actually get numbers on that Georgia defense, Jameson Williams, who still he's coming off of an ACL tear that is still being talked about as a potential top 10 pick. It just seems like we're going to look back in 3 years and be like, wow, we really blew it with the George Pickens thing.
This is music to my ears. I absolutely love this. All right, so let's look at the rest of the roster for the Green Bay Packers. We know that wide receiver is a big need, but I'd love to hear from you, defensive side of the ball, kind of like what they're thinking, what their needs might be there. I know they have some offensive line creativity, but like where a pick might matter most for them along the offensive line. And I also know that Green Bay, more than other teams, feels like they have certain thresholds at certain positions. So as you go over what their needs might be, maybe some thresholds if they apply to some of those positions that Green Bay might target.
Yeah, if you guys ever look up the RAS stuff, if you guys are following the draft, I'm sure you guys know what that is, relative athletic score. Most of their picks, like 80% of them are like 7.0 or higher. So think of like top 30 percentile, like they're just basically just spamming those guys. Offensive line, the thresholds that are important are basically like average to above average, agility drills in both the 3-cone and the short shuttle. They also have pretty strict thresholds for size. That really comes in handy with like the wide receivers and the corners, right? So like they're not going to take a super skinny or super short wide receiver. Like they're pretty much going to look at like guys who are like 5'11" or higher across the board. So in terms of position needs, though, I mean, I think the big ones are just like line of scrimmage defenders. I mean, you look at their defensive line, they had 5 guys last year that they played consistently on the interior. That probably wasn't enough. I mean, there were so many games that their guys were just gassed. And when the backups came in and it's Tyler Lancaster coming off the bench, teams just know like, hey, we can just kind of run at the backups once the backups are in. The edge rushers, the depth really hurt them. I mean, think about it last year. They signed Whitney Merciless because they needed him. Whitney Merciless is now retired. Zadarius Smith got released after he missed basically the entire season this past year because of his contract situation. So now like their third rusher on the edge might be like Tipa Nalia, who's 230 pounds. It's not great. So I could see them easily, depending on who is available, looking at an edge rusher or an interior defensive lineman. I think a guy who makes a lot of sense just based off of kind of where he's being mocked and stuff. Like if George Karlaftis is there at 22, I think that's the one like all Packers fans like look at each other and are like, yeah, we didn't need to take a wide receiver there. Like that probably makes sense. We'll grab one at 28. And that's maybe where, George Pickens comes into play there.
Karlaftis and Pickens, the Justis combo at 22 and 28. Sign them up. All right, speaking of that, let's put you on the clock, right? Pick 22 was out of your hands, but you do have all the power for pick number 28 for the Green Bay Packers. Justis, where are you going with this selection?
The 28th pick of the NFL draft, Logan Hall.
Ooh.
Defensive lineman, Houston.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
I love his game. He's putting on the weight right now. I think he's going to get a little bit bigger once he's in the pros. Very athletic for his size. You watch some of his games and you're like, holy crap, this is absolutely a first-round pick just in terms of height, weight, speed, like all the Planet Theory stuff, right? I think he's athletic enough that he can play on the edge for some reps. I think ideally he's like a 5-tech, which I think that would go nice with what Green Bay has right now. So if your interior offense or your interior defensive line is Kenny Clark, Dean Lowry, and Logan Hall, you're pretty happy. And then you rotate Hall and Lowry, at 3-tech or whatever. But I think Logan Hall too can play some edge reps. So like you're talking about pressure packages, maybe he could play outside the tackle and that can get, Rashawn Gary on the interior head up on a center or a guard or something like that. And you end up helping 2 positions at once. I think that's kind of like the perfect pick for the Packers in this situation with, whoever's left on the board right now.
I was standing next to Logan Hall on the field at the Senior Bowl, and that dude was just, not to say a cliche, but like built different, like physically, like his lower body, just like he was built like an NFL defensive lineman. So that immediately stood out to me. I know he could play at a variety of different weights, and he feels like he fills all the profiles of what the Packers would actually go for as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. they hit athleticism and then like defensive linemen, pass rushers just constantly. It's just like they just spam that in the first round. They'll take corners every once in a while, but they rarely target kind of like offensive guys. I mean, sometimes there's tackles like a Brian Bulaga or something like that. They famously never go wide receiver in the first round and all that. So they definitely invest in these defensive line prospects. And kind of looking at the board, I mean, to me, when it came down to this pick with a wide receiver already off, it's between Ekwonu and Logan Hall for me.
All right. And then he ends up going Logan Hall. Connor, what do you think about the Logan Hall pick? He's got some steam from the guys who have been on for this guest mock draft lately. So now he goes off the board here at 28.
I like it. I'm pretty high on Logan Hall. I don't know if he'll make it into the first round, but this just goes to show you that it's going to be close. There is a good chance. There are homes for him at the back end of round one. And I really like that Justis highlighted his versatility. The different ways you can move him along, the alignments on the defensive line is really going to be the value with him as he grows into that body, adds more mass, and becomes that every down kind of player. So Logan Hall, he fits that front perfectly, and I like the pick.
If he doesn't go in the first round, he is one of those priority guys at the beginning of the second.
Absolutely.
Like he will not last long, no doubt about it. Everybody go follow Justis on Twitter. Go follow all of his great work over at Acme Packing Company. Justis, thank you so much for joining us, my friend.
Anytime, guys, whenever you need me.
We're up to number 29, the last pick in the 20s here in the guest mock draft. It is the Kansas City Chiefs, the first of two picks that they have back-to-back here. They've got 29 and 30, but to tell us all about what they could do with maybe both of these picks, but at least what they're going to do at 29. We have Seth Keysor on, who is the writer for Chief in the North. It's a Substack that covers the Kansas City Chiefs. Seth, thank you so much for joining us, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me. This is fun. This is that time of the year where we get to do dude fan fiction. That is the NFL draft, and it's awesome.
We get to play pretend, if you will, role play as a bunch of NFL GMs with absolutely no consequences to it, which is the part that I absolutely love. So look, Seth, obviously Kansas City Chiefs, one of the juggernauts in the NFL. They have been over the last couple of years. They've been to Super Bowls. They've won a Super Bowl. Now they're losing Tyreek Hill. And losing arguably the number one wide receiver in the NFL that is essentially a cheat code. I mean, I'm surprised that it was still legal that Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill were allowed to be on the same team with Travis Kelce as well. Right. But now he's gone, all jokes aside. And they got a pretty penny back for him. So they got a lot in return, including having 2 first-round picks now. But how do you go about replacing a Tyreek Hill? What is the thought process there? And is that something that's even feasible to do here with the extra first-round pick?
I don't think it's feasible to replace Tyreek Hill just because there's never been a Tyreek Hill in league history. People want to compare, but in terms of athletic profile and the way he plays profile, there's just never been a wide receiver like him. He's one of the greatest athletes I've ever seen play. People never really appreciated it until they watched it live, and they'd watch him on jet sweeps just run around NFL corners like it was high school or something. And you can't replace a guy with singular traits like that. So I think what you have to do is you try to add high-level players. You try to add pieces. You try to add, okay, this guy can do this guy can do this, and then this guy can do this. And all together, you've got 3 guys that can all do in total what Tyreek Hill does. And hopefully, because it's 3 guys instead of 1, you end up slightly ahead of the curve. MVS is a deep threat. He doesn't do a lot of the other stuff Hill does, but he's a good deep threat. Juju Smith-Schuster is good on shallow and intermediate routes, not a deep threat. So you got those 2 guys, but you still need an X receiver. You still need someone who can provide a little more juice to the passing game. And then I think the hope is piecemeal is better than one player. I have to hang on to that hope because when I saw he got traded, that blew my mind. That was one of the most unwelcome trades that I've ever seen as a fan.
Well, it happened. Yeah. It happened so fast.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, that was the thing.
It was like, Tyreek Hill, he's the Chiefs have allowed him to explore a trade. And then 2 hours later, it was like, okay, teams are heavily interested in Tyreek Hill. And then 2 hours later, it was like, okay, Tyreek Hill's on the Dolphins. And it's like, hold up, that was 4 hours of our life. What in the world just happened here?
I was upset at the time. And I mean, they got a good offer from Miami. They got a ton of picks, and I get it. But really, it tells me that they really meant what they said when they said They kind of let Hill dictate some of the process, and they weren't looking to take a bunch of bidders because, it's like, hey, Veach, play the market a little bit, man. Like maybe wait a minute and see if someone offers you more. But it was crazy. I mean, my friends who tend to know more things than I know behind the scenes, I mean, they were saying as recently as a week or two before the trade, they were like, no, both sides really want to get this done. And then it all fell apart.
Man, crazy.
But they have a lot of picks now. I've moved on, other than a slight twitch every now and then, but it's barely noticeable.
They do have a lot of picks right now. So we know we have you picking 29th today, but let's stay away from that for a second. Have a little fun and pretend that you're going to get creative with this draft capital in a way that we can't do on this mock draft format, but that the Chiefs can do on draft night and move up from 29. And it doesn't have to be 29 and 30 to come up. It could be 29 and a collection of day 2 picks to come up with all the extra assets they have. Seth, who is I guess we'll look at wide receiver because we do know it's still a need. Who is the wide receiver in this class that would be your dream to have on the Chiefs that you'd sit there and go, I would like them to get a little creative with this draft capital, move up, get this guy, and it would be a little easier to deal with that Tyreek Hill trade because of it?
Sure. It's tough because there's 3 guys that I have as like my absolute tier 1 guys in London, Williams, and Olave, whose name I can never say right, but I think he's a really good receiver. Those 3 are all my tier 1 guys. And oddly enough, given the way that Andy Reid generally does things, the one that I would go with, I've fallen in love with the prospect, committed the cardinal sin. If they could find a way to get Drake London, I'd freak out because his skill set's very different from the guys they've traditionally used. But I have also never seen a guy turn 50-50 balls into like 90-10 balls, like every single game against every corner. And people, I mean, he can separate. People think that's because he never separates. Well, it's because they threw him the ball like 15 times a game. That's why you're bound to get more contested catch situations. He'd be my absolute dream guy just because I think he can win in a way that the modern NFL allows because of how much more physical receivers can be than corners. And he's just unbelievable at it. So he would be my guy if they were going to get kind of creative, but I don't think you can go wrong with any of those 3 guys.
Moving over to the defensive side of the ball, you hear edge rusher as a potential need. They've got some guys still on the roster, but it seems like you see a lot of mock drafts with them potentially tapping into edge here at pick 29 or 30. The same thing with corner. When you talk about the Kansas City Chiefs, you talk about scoring a lot of points and not only building a offensive weaponry, but also a defense against passing could be to their advantage, especially for a team that scores as much as they do. So on defense, what do you think the priority should be here at the back end of the first round? If it was, between an edge rusher or a cornerback, which one would you be leaning as the bigger area to go after?
I think if I were the Chiefs, I would lean towards edge rusher, partly because they've shown over the last 2 or 3 years, especially the ability, and they've done it multiple times, to take corners from out of nowhere, develop them. Spagnuolo puts them in a position to succeed to where they don't play great, but they're decent, right? You end up with 3 or 4 decent corners and they play pretty well. You can live with that. And they've shown they can do it. Charvarius Ward just got paid. He was traded for a lineman. An offensive lineman they were going to cut anyway. L'Jarius Sneed was a low pick. Rashad Fenton was a low pick. Rashad Breeland was kind of on the scrap heap. I mean, for some unknown reason, I always thought he was a good player. But they've shown they can develop corners well and put them in position to succeed. They have not shown they can develop edge rushers or defensive linemen, really. I mean, they've got a new defensive line coach, but they desperately need talent there. Frank Clark has not played particularly well. It's Chris Jones and then a bunch of shrugs. And that is not fair to Chris Jones, who is an awesome player. I think they just have to, they have to attack that early and often because they have not shown they can necessarily develop guys to maximize their potential. You just need more talent there.
Looking at the offense now post Tyreek Hill, you talked about how, it could be a little bit more varied, or they could be using a lot of different guys and separating targets. And do you think that can play into the draft where we see an identity change? Maybe they add a second tight end to play with Kelsey, and they run more, obviously, 12 personnel, or maybe they do add another back to this roster when Edwards-Helaire, gets a little banged up. Or do you think there's going to be any kind of element in this draft that makes them a little bit more of a smash mouth team, or do you think with Mahomes and Andy, this is just who they are?
I think it was interesting to watch down the stretch last year in response to all the shells teams were playing against them. They really became more of a dink and dunk team in a way people didn't think they could do. Tyreek Hill basically became a really, really turbocharged possession receiver. It was weird to watch. And so they've shown they're willing to adapt some things. Andy Reid's never going to be a guy that's going to run the ball a ton, but their current offensive line combined with the way teams play Patrick Mahomes and will play Patrick Mahomes, that's not going to change with or without Hill there. It's begging for them to run into light boxes out of shotgun. Yeah. It's begging to run just a bunch of duo right down their throat because that interior line is awesome at it. They're so good at it. And it just drives you crazy. You know, they run for like a 6-yard gain on first down and then not run again for another, 15 minutes. So I think you could see a shift in philosophy that way, trying to get teams having to make difficult decisions with personnel with another tight end, because Kelsey's a good enough blocker against, secondary types on the move that he can make teams pay for playing small against them. You get another guy like that, they could do some interesting things. So I'd like for them to do that, but I've been hurt before when it comes to Andy and running the ball more.
I don't think Travis Kelce is going anywhere anytime soon, but he is 33, 34. I'm looking at his contract right now. And obviously they start to owe him a lot of money on the cap over the next couple of years. It goes to 14, 16, 18 million. And then at that point, he's 34, 35, 36. How quickly might life after Travis Kelce be coming now that Tyreek Hill is gone? Like, are they about to almost kind of just like reset this offensive identity? Because for the longest time, of course, it was Patrick Mahomes, it was Tyreek Hill, and it was Travis Kelce, and it was that combination. But with Hill gone, with Kelce aging, are we close to almost more of a total reset on the offensive side of the ball with Kansas City than maybe we're leading on to believe?
It's all going to depend on how Kelce ages. He's obviously, when you watch him play, he's obviously already, I get emotional just thinking about it. He's obviously lost a step. He was a crazy explosive athlete coming out. He's not that guy anymore. However, he is he is open just as often as he ever was. And unless he loses a full another 2 steps or so, the way he gets open is that he reads the field better than anyone I've ever seen. And I don't mean any tight end. I mean, he's a freak. He just, everyone noticed what happened in the AFC Championship where, if they play that same coverage, I'm just going to, go right up the seam. He sees the game in just a different way. And that's why he's always open. And that included last year when you look at the All-22. The man just lived open. And whether that's just because of Hill, I don't think it is. I think if you have a really good understanding of NFL zone concepts or match concepts and you know how to exploit it, you're going to get open. But you never know when that floor is just going to drop out. And you would assume it's going to happen in the next few years. Not everyone's Tony Gonzalez and can play into their late 30s. So I do think you're seeing a transition period here. They had the first Patrick Mahomes window, which would be like the Hill Kelce window, because you're not going to get 2 guys like that again. I mean, those guys they're all timers. And so I think now they're starting to move to the second window. And if Kelce can maintain what he's been the last few years for another couple of years, that'll make transition in it a whole lot easier. So that's a long way of saying, man, it depends, but it would be great to see him hang on. I mean, again, last year, he wasn't really winning with just pure athleticism anymore. He's just such a great route runner, and he can still move quite a bit. So I think he's got another couple of years of elite play left in him. That should help ease the transition, but that transition is coming.
All right, Seth, let's put you on the clock. Pick 29 for the Kansas City Chiefs. The power is in your hands. Who are you taking with this selection?
Sure. Well, like I was telling you guys before we got started, I mean, my feelings got hurt because I saw that my 3 main guys at receiver were gone. That said, fortunately for me, a couple of guys that I'm not quite as high on as everyone else were also taken. And that left George Pickens just right in my lap.
Let's go.
And so, I mean, that was actually a pretty easy pick for me to make. With Pickens there, some people will probably view it as a reach. I think most people that
Not
really,
me. Sorry. I'm so excited for this. I didn't know if we were going to get George Pickens in this guest mock, so this has me absolutely hyped right now. Let's go.
I love it. And that'll help me explain to people who doubt it. Maybe people think I'm an idiot, but the reality is most people that I respect that have really watched the film with Pickens said he's going to be a good one. And the stuff that he does, you can talk about his athleticism, whether he's as explosive now as he was in 2019. It usually takes 2 years to come back from an ACL. ACLs aren't what they used to be for starters. That doesn't scare me that much. You give it a year and a half, 2 years. The Chiefs just watched this happen with Juan Thornhill at safety. But what impresses me about Pickens is the way he wins. He's much more of a technician than he gets credit for in terms of a route runner. He's really, really exceptional at finding the open spaces, moving to the open spaces, and exploiting them. And we just got done talking about that with Kelsey. That's something that translates incredibly well at the NFL level, even if you're not 6'3". And fortunately for him, he is. And he moves way better than a dude his size should. And so I think his ceiling is quite a bit higher than people are giving him credit for. I think after the group that you've already got taken, I think he's one of the few really legitimate wide receiver one potential guys left. And I think he's got a good chance at it if his health permits it.
Connor, listeners of this podcast already know how I feel about George Pickens. So what about you? What do you think about George Pickens going 29 here to the Kansas City Chiefs?
This is a fun one, man, because Seth was put in a position where, and for a lot of people, the board has fallen perfectly for them, where a player at a position of need is right in their lap so they can't pass up. And in Seth's spot, that was not the case. The wide receiver run was insane. They went off the board. So I like that he was not afraid to go outside consensus, take a player that has not been mocked consistently in round one, but Pickens in that offense is such a easy fit to envision, even with his lack of production coming off the ACL tear, which once again, we got to give him time. The size, speed is going to play in that Kansas City offense. So this one is a lot of fun. It's creative, and it is one of those ones on draft day. If the board falls, the Chiefs don't move up, the wide receivers are gone, I wouldn't hate to see this pick for them.
Oh, I'm so happy. There will be 1,000-yard seasons in George Pickens' near future if he ends up going to the Kansas City Chiefs. Everybody go follow Seth Keysor on Twitter. Follow all of his great work at the Chief of the North newsletter. Seth, thank you so much for joining us, man. Not just because you picked George Pickens, but also for the great knowledge that you instilled upon us. We really appreciate it, man.
Of course, and you can Venmo me that $20 anytime for taking
Pickens. I got you off air. We'll hit it in a few seconds.
I appreciate you guys having me. This is fun.
All right, only 3 picks left. We were up to pick number 30 in the guest mock draft series. We got 30, 31, 32, and the recap of the entire guest mock draft picks coming to you on a bonus episode this Saturday. So make sure you guys look out for that. And then, of course, it's draft week next week, everybody. Starting on Monday, we are getting right to it. Final player rankings, final mock drafts, final big boards, everything leading up to Thursday night, round 1 of the NFL draft. I'm excited for it. Before then, we'll see you guys on Saturday.